Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devu.com. In this lesson, we're going to talk about arrays. Often you're going to need to work with several related variable values. So how do you work with multiple variables that are all somehow related? They're all intended to be used as part of a group, but how can I treat them as if they are part of the same group? How can I enforce that relationship between multiple values? So as you look on screen right now, this is an example of how not to do it. Here you can see that I have a series of numbers, or variables rather, defined as variable names number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and I assign their values appropriately, right? Now, the problem with this scheme that I've cooked up here is that I'm relying on a name, and names of things are fragile. They're not enforceable because we're making up the names ourselves. The compiler wouldn't care if we misspelled one of the names, and it would be just fine with that. And we could probably work our way through that, but still, they're just kind of loosely connected together and only connected because of the meaning of the name that they have. It's not a foolproof approach towards creating related values and treating them all as a single unit. And that's really the intent here. Now, previously, I compared a variable to a bucket that's created in the computer's memory that's just the right size for a single value of a given data type. Now, to extend that analogy a little bit further, you can think of an array as a bucket that inside of it contains other little containers, other little buckets that you can put values into, okay? So another way to think of an array is that it's a sequence of data all collected together in the same variable or bucket in the computer's memory. Now, I hesitate to use the word collection or sequence. Those have a certain connotation for programmers. Collections definitely have a specific connotation to .NET developers, but you can think of an array in a sense as a grouping or a collection of data, lowercase c, collection of data, okay? So you declare an array just like you would any other variable. You start with the data type that you want to create, and then you say how many elements, or rather how many of those little sub buckets inside of the big bucket that you actually want to create. And so in this particular case, what we want to do is create a quick example of an array in action so that we'll be able to revisit this example a couple of times and learn more about arrays in the process. So the first time we'll use kind of a longhand format here. Let me get rid of this because we know that's not right. So let's go ahead, and you can see that I've already created a project called Understanding Arrays. Pause the video, take a moment to create a new project named Understanding Arrays, catch up to where I'm at, and then unpause the video and we'll continue on. And what I'm going to do is create a new array. And so to do that, I'm going to create one named numbers. And then I'm going to say how many little subcontainers I want inside of it, and then give it the data type. All right, there's actually a shorter way to do this. Let me just show you the short way because nobody ever does it this way. All right, so here we go. In this particular case, you have to remember that this number is 0 based. So while it says 4, there's actually 5 containers because you have to count 0 whenever you're dealing with arrays. All right, so in other words, we're creating a bucket in the computer's memory, a variable named numbers. Inside of that bucket, there are like 5 containers, and we're going to reference each of those containers by their ordinal position, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 little subcontainers inside of our array called numbers. They're all going to be integer values inside of it. You can't mix and match, all right? And so now that we've declared our array, we can actually start assigning values and retrieving values from the array using this style syntax. So for example, if I want to reference the first item in the array, I'm going to use parentheses and then the number 0. So parentheses are doing double duty, just like the equal sign did double duty. Remember, the equal sign was the method invocation operator. Now it's also used for so that we can access individual elements of our array. So in this case, we're going to set the first little subcontainer inside of our array, the first element of our array, at index 0 equal to the value 4. And here I'll just go ahead and keep working with the next element in the array. We'll set that equal to the value of 8. And then we'll set the next element of the array equal to the value of 15. The next element in the array equal to the value 16. And then the next element of the array equal to the value 23. Okay? And that's roughly what we see that we accomplished here. The good news now is that I can just treat this array with the keyword numbers, and I can access all the items inside of that without, and they're all collected together, I guess you could say, inside of the same memory area and the same label. In this case, the name numbers. So I would verbalize this in one of a number of different ways. For example, I would say that numbers sub 1 equals the value 8, or the numbers array at index 1 equals the value 8, or I might say the second element of the numbers array equals the value 8, or something along those lines. Okay, so this is called the index, the value, the numeric value to actually access an individual element, or what I was calling a subcontainer inside of the array itself. So the numbers are indexes, and they allow you to access an element of the array. And here we're assigning the values, and we can retrieve the values in the same way that we would any other variable. Okay. So that's the nomenclature that you would use to talk about them. Now, what happens if, for example, I try to access one more element of the array? And so here, in this case, I'm going to try to access number sub 5. And here, let me do console.write, writeline. And we'll just do something like, tell me how many items are in the array. How can I tell how many items are in the array programmatically? I can use a property called length. Okay, so give me the length of the array. In other words, give me how many items are in the array. And then we'll just do console.readline. So let's see what happens here when we attempt to use an extra element of the array, attempt to assign an index outside of the 5 that we defined here as the original size of the array. All right, well, we get our first exception, runtime exception that we've experienced while coding in Visual Basic. Here we have an index out of range exception wasn't handled. In other words, we were able to compile our code, but when we were running our code, we ran into a problem and it stops the execution of the code. The user can't proceed. In fact, what they'll see on their screen is dramatically different than what we see on our screen. In fact, let me just kind of stop the running of this application and show you. If we were to release this application as is, our end users would see something much uglier. And so I'm sorry for this quick aside. I just want to show you what you would see here. We'll talk about this all in depth a little bit later. Let me run the app and notice what happens. You get immediately this, stopped working. A problem caused it to stop working correctly. And then you get this unhandled exception. It spits out all this information. That's what your end user would see. As a developer running the application, Visual Studio kind of steps in and it puts up a friendly message box and explains what the situation is and how to fix it. But ultimately, the index 5 is out of range. In other words, there's a range of accepted values. And since we have created an array with 5 elements, but we try to access a 6th element, we're going to get an exception. So we can't do that. Okay. We can do something like this, console.writeline, and we haven't looked at how to actually access a given element of an array. Here we'll do, we'll use that replacement code that we learned about earlier. So the third element of the array contains, and then we'll just do like that. So we'll use the open and closing curly braces with the number 0, and then we'll access that third element of the array. In fact, the third element of the array is not 3, the index of 3, it's the index of 2, right? All right, so just make sure you catch that. So let's run the application again. And you can see the third element of the array contains 15. The total length, the total number of items in the array is 5 items. Okay. Now, what if we wanted to actually display on screen the value of each of the items? Well, this is where that for next statement comes in. So I'm going to type in this. Watch this. This is cool. For tab tab, right? So we're going to go from index equals, and remember, we can't start with 1. We got to start with 0. And then we'll need to go numbers.length. But this is going to give us the total number of items, and we want to convert the number of items into a 0-based index. So we're going to have to subtract 1, right? So this is going to give us 5 items, but we really want to go from 0 to 4. So that's why we did it this way. Okay. Just remember that little dance you have to do. And now we'll go console.writeLine and then numbers. And then in between the opening and closing parentheses, we'll use the index variable. That will allow us to index into each of the items in our array and print them out to screen. And so we see each of the 5 items there. Now, let me take a moment here and just comment some of this stuff out, because I want to show you an alternate way to define your, and not only define the array, but then also initializes values all in one shot through an initialization syntax. So here we're going to go dim numbers. Now, instead of giving it the number of items we want in our array, I'm just going to leave it empty. So I'm going to add the open and close parentheses, but I'm not going to put a number inside of it. I'm going to say I want these to be integers. And then I'm going to use an opening and closing curly brace. And inside of that, add a series of numbers like so. And when we run the application, we'll get the exact same results that we got last time. And you might be wondering, well, how in the world does this work? Okay, so we were able to create an array of type integer, and instead of saying explicitly how many items we want in the array, at the point of initialization, we'll just allow the number of values that we type in here to dictate the number of items in the array. So this will automatically create a numbers sub for 5 elements rather in the array. And it automatically puts values into each of the elements. Element 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then we just print them back out to screen, and that's how that works. Okay, let's comment all of this out. And moving on, let's look at the fact that we don't have to just use integers. We can also use strings. So here I'm going to create dim names. And I'm going to use that same style of syntax that we just used a moment ago. I'm going to say I want an array of names. I'm going to set them equal to the names of some people that I have known once upon a time. Not personally, unfortunately. That would be pretty cool. All right, and then what I want to do is iterate through each of the items. Now, I could use this same syntax that we used here and get the length and iterate through each index for this new array called names, but there's even an easier way to iterate through each of the items, and that's with a for each. So I'm going to type for each tab tab. Well, let's do that again. For each tab tab. There we go. So for each name as string in names. All right, and then here we'll go console.writeLine name. And let's go ahead and run it and see our names printed out to screen. Now let me explain what just happened there. So here we create an array of names. There's going to be 4 elements in the array. And here we're using the for each instead of the for. And this basically just says, hey, you've got an array or a collection, in this case an array. So let's just look through each item in the array. We'll copy off the current value as we're iterating through and we'll stick its current value as a string inside of a temporary variable called name. And then we'll just work with the name variable here as we console.write it out to our application's user interface. All right. Now you can also do some other very interesting things. For example, what if you wanted to take a string and you wanted to reverse it? So you wanted to write the whole string in reverse. Let me tell you a tiny little story that on my very first job interview, I was asked to take my name. They made me go up to the whiteboard and write my name on the whiteboard. And the guy who I actually became good friends with afterwards, but at the time I was pretty flustered. He said, okay, write code to take your name and print it backwards. And I had no idea how to do that, but I promised him, said, I don't know how to do it now, but I promise you within an hour after this interview, I will know. And so I did. I wrote him an email, found his email somehow, wrote him, and he was impressed enough by the fact that I was willing to figure it out that he didn't say, no, don't hire this guy. At least I don't think he did. But at any rate, I got the job. So I don't want you to go through that same humiliation that George put me through. And so here what we're going to do is create a little example. And we'll start off with one of my favorite motivational sayings. All right, and so remember what I said about the line continuation character and how you don't want to have to scroll off to the side of the screen every time just to see all of your text. It's much easier if you just, for example, pick a spot, add a double quote right in the middle, space, underscore, and then go to the very next line and tab your way over a little bit, and then add. You can either add the ampersand before the line break, or you could add it after the line break. But basically, we're going to make two strings, concatenate them together using the concatenation character, and this use the underscore character in order to get them all to essentially be one line of code, even though they're spread across two different lines of code. So there I have a very long sentence split up onto two lines of code as my text. And now what I want to do is convert each of the individual individual characters that are part of the string. Remember, we even said that this was a string of characters. Well, really, a string is just an array of individual characters all kind of, put together. So what if we could take that string and convert it back into an array of characters? And fortunately, there's a really easy way to do this. So I'm going to create something called a character, or a char. I'll call it a char array, an array of characters, as char equals my text dot to char array. So notice that the string data type has a method that Microsoft wrote that allows me to take that string and convert it into an array of individual characters, like so. So now here I have this char array, this array of individual characters, and I can do some really interesting things with it at this point. For example, I can use the array class and say array.reverse, and then give it my char array. What do you think will happen here? Yeah, it takes all the characters and reverses their ordinal position. So the first will be last and the last will be first, and all the others will follow suit as well. So now if I do a for each tab for each item in my char array, and here I'll just do console.write, not write line, just write my char, or actually item, because that's what I'm calling it here. This is the little temporary variable that we'll use. Then I think it's going to reverse that string for me. So there you go. This took that entire sentence and it reversed it. So you can read it backwards. You can get what you want out of life if you help enough other people get what they want. Very cool. Thank you, Zig Ziglar, for that help. All right, so you could use the for next if you prefer. I like this for each because it is so elegant and it just copies in the current value. You don't have to worry about lengths and indexes and things of that nature. You're just going to grab the next item and work with it. All right. So at any rate, hopefully this was pretty enlightening. Arrays are great. You'll learn about something called collections a little bit later in this course. Collections are awesome. They're like arrays on steroids. We're going to talk about those much later near the end of this course. But let's just continue on. We're learning lots of great stuff and we're compiling this toolbox. You're doing awesome. We'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.